Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chronicles of Hollywood History, Past, Present, and Future. Welcome. And here now, Corey Gomez.
Hello everyone and welcome. Chronicles of Hollywood History, Past, Present, and Future. Today I am joined by the star of one of my favorite films, Return of the Killer Tomatoes. I am here with the great Anthony Starke. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, because I've got you on speakerphone. I could put on my headphones if that might sound better. You know, I just thought of this now, which is this is of course the sort of content you want when you're actually recording. This is like the real nitty gritty inside baseball of Hollywood when you hear a guy going from speakerphone to this. Hang on, let's try this.
Sure.
How does this sound?
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, good. Let's go with this then. So, you go. Your turn.
Well, I'd like to know how you got started acting.
Oh boy, I was always fascinated with television. I sometimes like to say to people that I loved TV so much that I found a way to crawl inside of it. My first time on stage, I was 12. I basically was a big school variety show in my little town of Antioch, Illinois, and I wrote kind of a stand-up piece that was sort of the premise of the sketch was a 12-year-old running for president, and I had one of the teachers, like the school music teacher, I put him as a plant in the audience. It was like big auditorium, like 700 people. And I had a red carpet rolled out, a podium, and I had them play Hail to the Chief. And I walked out, and I had a big book under my arm that people probably thought I was going to put on the little lectern and start reading from. But I was so short that I got up to the podium, and it kind of hit me like at my forehead, and I took this big book and I set it down and I stepped up on top of it so I could look over the podium, and that's how I got my first laugh. So that was my first big moment on stage. Hang on just a second. I gotta uncoil something. Okay, I'm back. So then I just had written some jokes, and I had the music teacher in the audience playing my sort of campaign manager, and I had jokes like, because a big issue at that time was inflation, and I said, one first problem I'm going to solve on day one is inflation. And then I stared off into space, and I stepped up off of the big book, which turned out to be a dictionary. I put it up on the podium, and I looked up the word inflation, and I stepped back up on the book, and I said, and then I made some joke about, football being flat or something like that, and got another laugh. And so that was my first time on stage. After that, it was like high school plays, community theater plays, I won a scholarship to Marquette University for performing arts, which kind of paid for half my tuition of the 4 years that I was there. So that really got me rolling. Because I was on stage all the time and really learning a lot. And this was in the 80s when there was a lot of kind of ferment in that area in terms of filmmaking. John Hughes making all of his movies and things like that. And so I kind of got started my junior year in college by commuting back and forth from Milwaukee, where I was going to school, and Chicago, kind of going on auditions my junior year, and I got cast in a movie the week called First Steps with Judd Hirsch, which was a true story about a doctor who had developed a way of stimulating muscle movement in paralyzed people, a Dr. Petrovsky, I think. I got cast as this kid who was a quadriplegic who was part of this whole medical experiment. And so that's how I got my Screen Actors Guild card and all that kind of thing. And I was just a little bit out of Marquette, just graduated when I auditioned for Gary Marshall for Nothing in Common, starring Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason. And that's what brought me out to L.A. And I wasn't intending to come out to L.A., but since the movie had to finish filming out there, I came out. And I just stayed and was knocking around for a little while, and I started to work, and that's how I ended up in L.A.
You had the big run right in the beginning on TV in One Big Family.
Yeah. I had the distinct pleasure of working with Danny Thomas on that, who was a legend because he was a major stand-up comedian who really kind of developed a style of stand-up that wasn't, all just set up punchline, but really was about telling what they used to call shaggy dog stories, where he'd tell some long story about, his Uncle Tanoose and all the people in his family and all this kind of stuff, and the laughs would be along the way, which is really much more what contemporary stand-up is like. It's not jokes. It's more people pursuing a premise and telling stories. And then he became a big television star in the 50s with Make Room for Daddy, and then a huge producer of television in the 60s because he produced the Dick Van Dyke Show and the Andy Griffith Show and Mod Squad and all these shows. And his last series that he did for his son Tony Thomas, and Witt Thomas Harris was a big production company at the time because they did the Golden Girls and all these hit TV shows, but they also went on to do movies like Dead Poets Society and stuff like that. So Tony, his son, was our boss, and it was Danny's last series, and it was my first one. And it was a great honor to work with him because he was a real mentor to me, and he told me all kinds of wonderful stories about how and why he founded the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is one of the most phenomenal achievements, that I've ever heard of. Mm-hmm. And so it was a great way to get started.
I like how you were in it with Michael DeLuise, and then you guest starred on the Fear and Loathing with Russell. I can't remember the last name.
Russell Buckins.
Russell Buckins on 21 Jump Street, also with Michael DeLuise.
Yeah, I've gotten to be good friends with all the DeLuise boys. I got to be good friends with Michael, and we had that in common with Danny Thomas because he was really a mentor to both of us. He used to take us out individually for lunch and just kind of talk about life and the business and the do's and don'ts. And Michael's a lovely guy, and Michael had wonderful stories because of all the people he grew up with. This is a guy, because his father was Dom DeLuise, people in his house like Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks and all these people, you learn comedy, from people like that, and you end up being funny. And then, I worked with Peter on 21 Jump Street, and then I just got to be good friends with David DeLuise also, because we had kids at the same time, and I used to see him out at the park when we used to take our kids to the park, and they'd be running around, and we would talk. And when my son was a little older, he was a big fan of the Wizards of Waverly Place. I saw he was watching it on TV, and I saw that David played the dad of Selena Gomez on that show. And I poked my head in and I said, "Hey, Garrett, do you like this show?" He said, "Yeah, Dad, it's my favorite show." And then I called David, and then I poked my head back in the room and I said, "Hey, we're going to go visit them all on the set on Tuesday." And his head just about exploded.
Wow.
So I've gotten to be friends with all three of them.
Yeah, I hope to one day talk to Peter and Michael, because I've talked to three other people from 21 Jump Street, so kind of going the gambit on that. That was a great show. Did you have any impressions of Johnny Depp? Because you were in a couple scenes with him.
I didn't get to know him too well. I got definitely the impression that he was a little bit of a rogue, which he's sort of famous for being now, because they were all a little bit miffed at him because, he'd flown, it shot in Vancouver, and he had flown back to Los Angeles to kind of I don't know, participate in some kind of a parade or something strange like that, and didn't come back in time. And so, I guess they had to catch up on the shooting or something. It was something he was doing, but he was very chill and very friendly, and it was interesting because he was already becoming a huge star, even just from that show, even before he did all the movies with Tim Burton and everything.
Now, the first time I noticed you, and here's what's weird, because this is how I noticed you, was the George Burns film, 18 Again.
Oh, yeah.
And now here's how weird it was, because at the time I had already started training in martial arts. And when I was watching the film, because back then everybody and their grandma that was played the bad guy would throw like a horrible kick, and they were like the bad karate guy. You had the nicest snap on your spin kick, where you have to answer this after all these years. You are a martial artist, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, I started when I was 12. Doing Taekwondo, and I was already a black belt by the time I did that movie, and I had been for a few years already, and they kind of let me choreograph. There's like 2 fight scenes there. They kind of let me choreograph them. I mean, I worked with the stunt coordinator, of course, but they kind of let me do my thing, and that was fun. It was a chance for me to do that. I've had very little opportunity to do that kind of thing because I don't have the look of like a tough guy, and so I don't tend to get cast in those roles. But I have been a lifelong student of the martial arts, even up to this day. I'm still training and still learning new things, and yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I train in judo. I trained in judo and tang sudo. Now I train in kempo. My son actually has a junior black belt in taekwondo, but yeah, at the time I was doing tang sudo. I was just a kid, but I remember I was like, that he's got such a snap on those kicks. It was like this guy's got to be a legitimate martial artist, because back then you didn't see it very often.
Oh yeah, no, it's true. You didn't, did you? I mean, and the thing is, there tends to be a kind of arrogance about that thing among movie producers and stuff, because we'll just teach them. Yeah. We'll just teach the actor. We'll set him up with somebody and we'll give him a few weeks. It doesn't work like that. And if you're studying Tang Sudo, that's essentially the same as Taekwondo. They're both Korean martial arts. They're both very centered on kicking, and particularly a lot of high kicks. And you don't learn that overnight. That takes months at a minimum if you're working with an actor who, say, has a dance background. So yeah, you can teach Patrick Swayze how to throw a high kick, because it's a kind of modification of perhaps some ballet that he's done. But most people just can't do it. And so yeah, you're right. And I remember I was reading for a TV series that they were doing, like, back in the 90s, where they wanted this character to be kind of like sort of a lethal weapon, right? Like a guy that you would buy as a legit high-level martial artist. And I went into the room, and right before I did the reading, I just demonstrated a few kicks, and did some things. And they looked at me like I was kind of nuts. And I looked at them and said, well, I said, I think I said this exactly. I said, you know how it is. When you're auditioning people for a Western, suddenly everybody claims to be a cowboy. Mm-hmm. And it's BS. And so, you want a guy who can do this stuff, but they didn't seem to be interested because they didn't know what they were doing. And I happen to know the guy who ended up being the stunt coordinator, I think a guy named Mitch Gold. And I found out that he was coordinating that show. And I said to him, because I was training martial arts with a mutual friend of his, Louis Mandalore, and I said, "Hey, Mitch, how's the guy they got for that? How is he? Is he handy with the fight choreography?" And he rolled his eyes and he said, "He's awful. He can't do anything. We have to double him for everything. And when you have to double somebody for everything, you can't get a lot of the coverage that you want." So you're right. That's a good observation, but that's because you were already studying, so you can see the difference.
Well, as much as I like the Karate Kid and Cobra Kai, respectively, There's a whole lot of in the movie, in the show, a whole lot of fight scenes where you see the back of somebody's head and the side.
Yeah,
because
that's right. That's right.
Kind of tell who knows what they're doing and who doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know that you would run for your life if you saw Ralph Macchio in a dark alley.
Oh, God, no.
I think William Zabka's a little more adept. He certainly was. When they did the movie, you could tell that he had some training. And on Cobra Kai, because I'm a fan of those movies and of the TV show also, and it's really kind of uneven in terms of the martial arts level. There are a few of the younger cast members who you can tell have a background, and then there are a few it's like no, they don't, and it does make a difference.
I'd like to know how these kids study martial arts for 3 weeks to a month, and they're already doing double backflips into guillotines and stuff like that. It's they must have the most. Martin Kove must be the most amazing sensei in the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's that deal he made with the devil is paying off.
Yeah, it's and like you said, some of them, when they fight, it's just it's sad to watch, but they're pretty good at hiding the negatives, bringing out the positives, and that and the fact I think it's just a well-written show.
Yeah, they got a great tone to it where it's that perfect balance between being homage and being satire, and that's what I liked about it. Particularly, it struck me right from the beginning in season 1 that they just found this great tone, and the way they made the character of Johnny kind of oddly lovable despite being so clueless. Despite being so obtuse, you kind of root for him. They've been very clever, and I think that's because I heard Ralph Macchio talking about this, that the creators of the show were genuine major fans of the movie, so they kind of had a real vision of what they wanted to do with it.
I like the theory that the crane kick put Johnny in a coma, and this is all that he's dreaming all these years.
Very, very good. I like it. Yeah, sort of either who shot JR on Dallas, or the entire series of Lost, something like that. Yeah.
Now, Karate Kid was all well and good, but the second funniest movie ever made, one of my favorite movies of all time. When Arrow had me picked to review the disc before even knowing I'd seen the movie, is Return of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yes.
One of the greatest movies ever made, and it no one knew what the hell it was when it came out, but now you see it everywhere because your co-star in it was George Clooney with his big 80s mullet.
That's right. And so that's kind of kept it in people's consciousness, which is great because it's a genuinely funny movie, I think, I remember I had an audition for Oliver Stone for Born on the 4th of July, and Oliver Stone was real mean. He was one of the meanest people I've met, and he was looking at my resume rather disparagingly, and I had just done the movie, I think, and he says, Return of the Killer Tomatoes. I said, yeah, it's the sequel. We felt the world had waited long enough. Nothing. I got nothing from him. I'm like, okay, this is my A material, pal. What do you want from me? But yeah, I remember I auditioned for that movie, and I hadn't read the whole script, and they had a bunch of guys in all at once, and they were kind of running behind, and I managed to get a hold of the script, and I had learned my sides and everything like that, so I was kind of ready on that regard. So I spent some time, I think I was waiting for 45 minutes, and I just kind of quickly read through the script, and I kept laughing because I was a big fan already of movies like Airplane, mm-hmm. and that's why it was so great to later work with Leslie Nielsen. But I was reading the script, and I was thinking, I get this. I know what style of humor this is. I know how to play this. and it's some of the stuff is played really straight, and some of it is really big, and but I had a sense of what to do with it, and I was just really enjoying reading the script, and I went into the room, and John DeBello, the director, and his producing partner were sitting behind a little table, and George Clooney was there also because he'd already been cast to play the best friend, and I read for those guys, and I had a feeling when I walked out of the room that they wanted me to do it. I'm glad that it did, because we had a lot of fun. We went down to San Diego and shot for 5 weeks during the summer, and it was like summer camp with an entire production team. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, back then there were not a lot of movies that did the fourth wall break and the product placements. I remember I loved that the special effect, and they even make reference to it, is a painting of the house, and later you see it, the moon's the Pepsi logo. I mean, it was so clever. It holds up so well to this day.
I believe it is the first movie to ever spoof product placement.
And Wayne's World ripped it off.
I know, and that was way later than us.
Yeah,
that was way later.
15 years
so I think we were the first. Yeah.
Oh, I love, and it's just such a, and because I'm not going to lie to you, I hated Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. That is a terrible movie.
Terrible.
When I saw it, it's like Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and I remember the cover was, I think it was a big tomato running at people or something like that on VHS. And when I watched it, all the jokes that were coming, I mean, it was just so funny. It's one of my favorite movies to this day.
Oh, that's great. I'm very happy to hear you say that, because I genuinely was laughing out loud when I read the script, and then they gave me and George a lot of latitude to rewrite things, to punch up jokes, to improvise things, and that's one of my favorite memories of the thing was, George would kind of come into my trailer, and we would kind of, before we shot a scene, we would kind of look at the lines and punch things up, and, I remember writing certain lines like, the whole thing about, us talking about her while she's in the kitchen, mm-hmm. and she's saying, she listens to the farm report, she tapes the farm report, yeah. And me saying, about her sexual prowess, I said, you should see what she can do with six milk bottles and a tuning fork. These were jokes that I wrote, so I was glad that they made it into the movie, because, I have no idea what someone could do with 6 milk bottles and a tuning fork, but it must be good. So, so George and I had a lot of fun working on it, and, hanging out, on days off and stuff like that. And Karen Missel was great, and, John Astin was great. Everybody, and the whole, production team, and John DeBello, it was just a lot of fun, and, but, we had to move pretty quick. I mean, we got there was a lot of, there was basically no budget. I mean, it was a very low budget, but it was also kind of weirdly ambitious, because they were looking to have big set pieces and big, things like that in the movie for an independent comedy, so it was a lot of fun.
I started cracking up in the beginning when your uncle in the film is telling the story, and it's like, first New York fell, and you see all these people running to the right, then Boston, and it's the same people, and they're just running back and forth, different directions, just little jokes like that. Right. Especially when you see these big tomatoes, and if you look, they're clearly on like a skateboard or a board with wheels. It was so funny. People calling into the $1 movie that you're watching, and whoever the writers of that were, geniuses. There's no other way I can say it. And everyone in that movie, yourself, Mr. Clooney, Karen, just absolutely hysterical.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, they did do a great job of the script, because it's very hard to write that kind of a movie, in that kind of airplane style, because it's joke, and you've got to have a high percentage of the jokes that are landing for the thing to work, because really, if you analyze it too closely, there's almost nothing there. It's just jokes, so thank you.
I remember when Errol sent me the collector set, I think a couple of years ago, and I told my wife, I was like, look what we get to watch so I can review it. And she looked at the box and she was like, oh my God, I got to watch this again. Like that.
Well, you have a patient wife.
Now, when you were, and here's what, like you said, what kind of kept it alive, why there were probably about 75 companies over the years that released it. Did anyone ever think back then that George Clooney would go on to be, George Clooney?
Well, I'm not surprised because, first of all, he was working pretty steadily already by that point. He wasn't really well known, but it is sort of the thing of a journeyman actor, whether it's, George Clooney in those days or me or until relatively recently, Bryan Cranston, for example. These are all people that I would see at auditions and stuff. And, although Bryan's a little bit older. And, it's like this. The guys who are good, they tend to, be in the lineup, of the people that are being considered, say, for a new TV pilot or this, that, and the other thing. They tend to be the guys that when you see them in the hallway, when you're coming to audition, you go, ooh, yeah, him again. I better be on my A game. There's a certain group of guys I used to call the usual suspects that are always kind of being considered for stuff that could lead to a breakthrough or breakout role. And he had already done several pilots, and he had actually been on an earlier version of a show called ER, which was a sitcom that didn't last very long. And he was sort of kind of known-ish for the facts of life and stuff like that. So he was working. But it wasn't until maybe 8 years after we made the movie, 7 years after we made the movie, that he got ER. And it's just, what leads to a breakthrough is kind of a funny thing, because even he has said, if ER had been put on Friday night as opposed to Thursday night, you wouldn't know who I am. Because the show could have been on for 10 years, but if the whole industry isn't watching, it doesn't lead you to getting necessarily shots at being in movies and things like that. But he was, as a young guy, very energetic and charismatic and very funny and good looking and all this kind of stuff. So he had a lot going for him. So it was never that surprising to me that he finally found something that was the right vehicle for him. And I always thought that the role of Doug Ross on ER, because I got to know George pretty well, really suited him and was the perfect kind of vehicle for him, because he was kind of like Doug Ross at that point in his life, where he was far more invested in his career than any kind of personal commitments, in relationships and stuff like that. And I think that, Doug Ross was that kind of guy that, where he always would look to redeem himself was in his job, and then, if he's goofing around a little bit more in the rest of his life, fine. Obviously later as a man, he's become a very, very serious person in terms of the things he's involved with and whatnot. But, I thought the role on ER suited him perfectly, and because the show was a massive hit, the rest is history, as they say.
I always like him because anytime he's on a talk show, I haven't seen him on a talk show in a while, but when he used to do the heavy talk show circuit, he always mentioned Return of the Killer Tomatoes. Of course, it'd be a joke, I was in Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and I always liked that so much because everybody knew that was one of my favorite films, and he was somebody that always talked about it. And did you keep a fuzzy tomato from the film by chance?
No, I did not. But there's someone just started following me on Twitter, and it is the Twitter account of FT. So there is a fuzzy tomato Twitter account. You can find that. So I think it's just at FT or something like that. That would be a person that you should want to contact in case you want to ever have the fuzzy tomato on the show.
Now, were you surprised when they made the third one that you guys weren't in it?
I was surprised. I was totally surprised by that, actually, because I was never contacted. They never expressed any interest in me participating in it, and I thought that was weird. You know, when they went to Paris or something like that.
Yeah, or no, the third one was with the Carrots.
Oh, I don't know.
And then they went to Paris because that was Mark Price. That's where they ate France.
Yeah, right. No, I never really heard from them again. You know?
Yours was the only good one.
Okay, well, good to know.
no shame in admitting that. And I'm counting the cartoon, too. But I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see eventually another, version of it. I mean, the Killer Tomatoes are kind of a pop culture phenomenon still to this day.
Well, it depends on where those guys are at in their life. I mean, it was, I don't know if you know this, but it was a production company called Foursquare down in San Diego, and they were primarily a sports footage, sports documentary, like Wide World of Sports, footage, kind of a show. I mean, a kind of a production company. They did a lot of that kind of work, where they would cover sporting events and things like that, and that's how they made their money. And the whole Killer Tomatoes thing was sort of a sidebar passion project for them. It was basically something they did for fun. I think they've ended up making it lucrative enough for them, but it wasn't really their focus at the time, so who knows what they're up to now.
Now, what was it like going on to do the amazing Killer Tomato film to going on to the good Timothy Dalton film, License to Kill?
It was wonderful. I just did a podcast for a trio of guys from Manchester, England. I think it's called Really 007 Podcast, and that just got released yesterday, and that's on YouTube, so you can check that out. But I got into a lot of License to Kill stories, and because it was amazing. I mean, just working on that set with all the huge practical stunts and explosions and all that kind of stuff, because this is all pre-CGI, and I think that's part of the brand and the excitement of the 007 franchise is all the stunts and all the stuff are practical. So when you see a truck flying off the side of a mountain high road and narrowly missing a small prop plane, that's something that actually happened. When you see a tanker truck exploding and it's sends up this mushroom cloud, that's something that we were actually doing out in the desert. So all of that stuff was exciting, and taking the plane flight home with Tim Dalton, because we got wrapped on the same day, and then going to the premiere later where Charles and Diana were there. It was all very exciting stuff, and it's as I was saying to those guys, that it's one of the 3 times in my life where I got to really enter the world of something of which I was already a fan, which was the James Bond world, doing Cheers, because I was a huge Cheers fan, and doing Seinfeld. Doing those 3 things was like, those were things that, I was as much of a fan as anybody.
So I'm probably the only guy that's ever talked to you that likes Return of the Killer Tomatoes more than License to Kill.
Well, I don't know. It's apples and oranges, or apples and tomatoes. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one you were in that I really liked was, and surprisingly, I have to say surprisingly, because I know a lot of my friends disliked it, was Nowhere to Run, the Van Damme film.
Oh yeah. I mean, I had a brief. My character had a brief life in that one. I break Jean-Claude Van Damme out of a prison bus and then get shot in the neck, and that was it for me. But that was a lot of fun, because and that was like I got to do a little bit of fighting in that one, but not much, and it was kind of cool to see Jean-Claude move, because the guy's a phenomenal athlete.
Yeah, I was wondering, it's like, okay, Here's Anthony Stark. He knows martial arts. Oh, he's dead. You know what?
Yeah, right.
You know, it'd been better if you'd been like one of the, you know, like what I always would want to portray in a film, like Henchman 2 or Thug 1. You know,
I know.
Fight with Van Damme. That would have been cool.
Yeah, I guess they didn't consider me scary looking enough. So I was just a little buddy who broke him out and was the sacrificial lamb, to kind of kick off Jean-Claude's journey of redemption or whatever the hell was happening.
It was like basically it was the remake of Shane.
Yeah, right.
Now, if you're especially being such a comedy fan and stand up, how amazing was it to get to work with Leslie Nielsen in Repossessed?
It was wonderful. He was it really he had this kind of wisdom about him, because he'd been through a lot, he'd seen it all, done it all, and he had big success kind of come to him later in his career, and he spent most of his career being a very kind of serious actor, playing, a lot of stuff in almost the kind of dry, almost film noir style of acting. And then, the Zucker brothers and Abrams kind of used that kind of persona, like they did with Robert Stack and, Lloyd Bridges, to kind of turn it on its head and have it basically do the same thing they'd always done in their career, but completely goof on it, and so he was totally in on the joke and loved the fact that he was getting to do comedy at this point in his life, because it's really more his personality. He had this motto, which was never be older than 18, which basically said, don't grow up too much. Let yourself continue to be a kid as you get older. Don't think that you have to be serious about everything because, you're not a kid anymore. And he used to carry this little thing in his hand that made like a farting noise. And he would hold it in a way you could never see that it was there. And he never broke. Like, if he didn't want to laugh, he did not laugh. And he would have this thing with him, even while we were shooting scenes, and you just all of a sudden hear this, and he had this ability to kind of do it at just the right moment that I would start laughing and fall out of frame, and it started to make me nervous. So I said to him, Leslie, you got to knock it off. I'm going to get fired. And he goes, oh no, I won't let him fire you. But he wanted to keep me around because, he found me amusing. And, and he would do that with, I remember one time a woman came to the set and, everyone was standing in line at the catering truck to get lunch. And she was there visiting somebody who worked on the movie. And, she got the feeling maybe she'd never been on a movie set before. And she was kind of excited to be there. And she happened to be in the line for lunch right behind Leslie Nielsen, and all of a sudden you hear this, and he turns around and he looks at this woman with complete seriousness and says, I'm sorry, it must be the seedless grapes. I just can't seem to digest them. And he just then stares at her, and the woman looks at him and goes, oh no, that's fine, that's fine. And he goes, thank you, you're very kind. And as he's turning back around, and so the rest of us are falling down laughing, but that's my salient kind of recollection of him. He was kind, he was funny, fun, and never took himself too seriously.
Superhero movies, and I'm a lifelong comic collector, so I'm naturally a big fan of them. You were in one of the first, probably second or third superhero show out there, the original Flash show. You got to play the Ghost.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, right.
Was that fun? Because that was kind of before superheroes became the thing.
It's funny. I get a lot of this on Twitter of people saying, because the character, the Ghost, was the premise was he was like from the 50s, like it's his hairdo and everything, and he had this like silvery spacesuit from a 50s sci-fi movie and everything, and then here it is. Like 1990 when we're making this, and he had frozen himself cryogenically to reemerge, 30 years later, and at a time when technology would have caught up with him to where he could better implement his schemes, because he could send his consciousness into technology, you know, and kind of be everywhere at once. That was sort of the premise, you know, and you know, he ends up reuniting with his girlfriend who, you know, had gotten older, but, you know, he hadn't, so there's this odd romance there and all this kind of thing. And, you know, he eventually, you know, I forget what happens at the end if they kill him or whatever, but I don't think they killed him.
Jason Bernard comes back as the guy that stopped you in the 50s. He kind of comes out of retirement to come after you.
Right, exactly. Nightshade comes back to get me.
Thank you.
So, you know, so when the new iteration of The Flash came on the CW,
great show.
The fans were clamoring at me and at the writers to say, why don't you bring back the Ghost? Because imagine what this guy would do now in the age of the internet and smartphones and everything. He would literally be everywhere. And I thought, yeah, it's a no-brainer. That's a great idea. And but they never did. I mean, it's like season 7 now or something like that. They never did it. And I can't quite understand why they wouldn't at least want to, I don't know, talk to me about the possibility of that, because I think that would be a really cool way to go. And to tie the two shows together like that would be great, but they didn't do it. So
yeah, they still may. I mean, that show's got a lot of life left in it.
Well, hopefully they will, you know, and maybe they listen to your podcast.
I you know, that would be awesome, because my son and I are huge fans of that show. Yeah,
well, I had a lot of fun doing it.
You know, another show I was a huge fan of that I've written, and I've got to talk to several people that have guest starred on it. A show that should have went a lot longer than the lousy season it did. You got to do an episode of The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr.
Yeah, and that's another show that I loved, because I love these things. I don't like Killer Tomatoes or whatever. It's absurd.
Yes.
You know, and I love Bruce Campbell, who I worked with on that, and I also worked with him later on Burn Notice. You know, the spy show. He was on that as well. But Briscoe County was like a quintessential kind of Bruce Campbell thing, you know, where he's sort of sending up the whole idea of being a square-jawed hero. Mm-hmm. You know, that's sort of like a Bruce Campbell thing. And but yeah, I mean, that was a lot of fun, because you know, it was almost like a satire of a Western. And you know, I got to play the world's dumbest cowboy who attempted to kill Briscoe by running him over with a stampede of cattle.
Olaf Brackman.
What?
Olaf Brackman, I believe was.
That's right. Yeah, he was not the sharpest tool in the shed.
It was a fun show. I'm really surprised, and it has a following to this day. I'm really surprised that it didn't get picked up for a second season.
Well, I tell you, I mean, that's, you know, anything I've been a series regular on could never manage to stay on the air, and some of the shows I was a series regular on were good. So it's a very it's beyond whimsical, you know, what determines what makes it and what doesn't.
Was anyone ever mad that you tried to rape Kelly Taylor in Beverly Hills 90210?
You know, I think Kelly Taylor was a little miffed.
Well, she was asking for it.
No, I did a whole podcast not too long ago that was just about Beverly Hills 90210 also, and we talked a lot about that. That was actually kind of an oddly intense experience, portraying that kind of character. That's the only time in my life I've ever done that. You know, I played a rapist, and you know, and doing that scene was a shock to my system to have to kind of play out some of that behavior, because it's so antithetical to who I am, like at a very core level, that's just even acting it out. And I'm not the most methody actor in the world. It kind of was it made me a little nauseous, you know. But it was a good experience overall, because I just blanked out on her name, who played Kelly.
Jenny Garth.
Jenny Garth was lovely, and great to work with, and a really, really good actress. And I got to be friendly with Ian Ziering, and Jason Priestley, who was a total gentleman and a pro, and I got to be friends with Luke Perry as well, because later on both of our little boys were in the same preschool together. So I would see him at like little kid pool parties and stuff like that. He was just a lovely guy, and it was very sad when he passed away.
Now, this is going to be the weirdest transition ever, I think, and you'll be proud to be a part of it. You played the rapist of Kelly Taylor in 90210, and Christopher Rich played a serial rapist in an episode of Renegade, the only time he's ever done something like that. And you guys both united in the George Carlin show.
That's right. And Chris and I had worked earlier on, we'd done a pilot that never went anywhere, although they did air it. And it was a pilot for Ron Howard and Brian Grazer's company, Imagine. And it was a 3-person kind of comedy called Smart Guys. Very funny, very weird, kind of ahead of its time. It was the sort of humor you'd see more on Parks and Rec, you know, and this was in 1988 we made this thing. It was directed by Jonathan Lynn, who later did like My Cousin Vinny and some of these other movies. And it was me, Chris Rich, and a fantastic stand-up comic who passed away not long ago named John Panette. From Boston. It was the 3 of us. So that's where I met Chris in 1988. And then 6 years later, we all got cast on the Carlin show, and that was one of the most fun experiences I've had in my life, because that cast was kind of like the cast of Cheers, you know, in that it was a real fun-loving, slightly wild bunch of people who really were funny and liked to have a good time. And me and Paige French and Alex Rocco and Mike Haggerty and Phil Lamar and Matt Landers and you know, just a wonderful assortment of people, and of course George. And our showrunner was oh my God, I was on a roll with names and then I just went blank. Our showrunner was Sam Simon, who passed away a few years ago also from I think colon cancer. But Sam was one of the co-creators of The Simpsons, and he was our showrunner. And we just had a bunch of great people and writers and everything. And you know, we would do the show, and on tape night after we were done, we would all go out to a bar near Warner Brothers called Timmy Nolan's in Toluca Lake, and you know, and have like a little cast party every week after we finished the show. So it was a ton of fun doing that show.
You know, as you being such a lover of comedy, was it another dream come true to be with, in my opinion, one of the greatest comedians that ever lived, George Carlin?
Absolutely was, and I learned a lot, because I later did stand-up. I hadn't done stand-up at that point. But I learned from him how he went about it. And he was so much smarter about it than most comedians, who will kind of wander onto stage, you know, on a slow night, you know, and have a kind of vague premise in their head, and kind of try to find the bit on its feet. You know, and then they would kind of, you know, thump around for it, and you know, have the bit sort of die for a while until they really kind of pull it together, and then you know, kind of lock it in. Whereas George really approached stand-up as a writing exercise, and he would write something, and then he would like let it sit for a while, and then rewrite it, and then he would memorize it verbatim. Okay, and that is why he always killed, is that by the time he put it up on its feet and put it on stage, he'd already worked the bugs out of it. You know, and then he might, you know, with the audience reaction, take things out or expand them based on what was getting a response. But basically, he was going by putting words on a piece of paper and then seeing what he himself thought was strong, and kind of get the audience to follow him. And so when I started doing stand-up, that's kind of how I approached it. I would write it and rewrite it and learn it verbatim and put it up on stage and kind of have that almost as like a little bit of a safety net from just going out there and bombing. If you've got a solid piece of material on paper, you're much better off than sort of winging it. But I learned a lot from him, and he was very kind and intelligent and thoughtful. And I got to be friends with his wife Brenda, who was a lovely woman. And when my son was born, maybe 3 years after we did the series, all of a sudden I got this huge box of clothes that showed up, at my doorstep. It was just this big box, and I opened it up, and it was all this like high-end, wonderful kind of boutique baby clothes in there, and it was from Brenda Carlin. Oh. And I called her up, and I said, Brenda, what are you, have you lost your mind? And she started laughing, and she said, oh, yeah, can you imagine, what I'll be like when I'm really the grandma, or whatever. And I had a wonderful talk with her, and then like 6 weeks later, she died. Because she had breast cancer before, and I knew about that, but she had beaten it. And so we had this exchange, and maybe a few days after we had spoken, she went to the doctor and got the diagnosis that the cancer had returned to her body. But because it was sort of a recurrence, it happened very quickly. And by the time they realized that it had come back, it was too late, and she was gone. But so that was a big blow for George, and it was a real honor that he had us in the cast and invited us to her memorial that he had at his home, and because we all got very close, and I became very good friends with Chris and very good friends with Mike Haggerty particularly, and even Alex Rocco, who I saw, I think, not long before Alex died too. He came to see a play that I had done with Gary Marshall, the last play that Gary Marshall directed. Alex came to see, and so I got to kind of get reacquainted with him. But we lost him too. I lost a lot of friends over the years. It's kind of sad, but it was a wonderful thing to know George and to know his family, and I'm still sort of friends on Twitter with their daughter Kelly.
One thing I gotta ask you, because I've taken up quite a bit of your time, and you've got such a lengthy filmography. You did an episode of a show that's very near and dear to my heart, Nip Tuck.
Oh, yeah.
And you were the most interesting character ever because you abandoned your entire family because your son got his cleft lip fixed. And I would really wanted to see like more of your characters as Sean McNamara's father. And you were so good in it. And it was like, why is this flashback just in the beginning? I want to learn more about this man and why he is mad his wife had surgery on their son's. It was just it was so interesting. Yet they didn't. Was there anything that was cut from that, or was that the whole part?
That pretty much was it. But this has been kind of a frustration of mine. Actually, is that I played a lot of roles where I thought, my God, they could have done so much more with this guy. And this is up to recently. I a couple of years ago did like the new version of MacGyver, and they introduced me as this character Henry Fletcher, who was like this international assassin posing as a 5th grade teacher, that MacGyver comes after. They had me in like 2 episodes before they got to really even explore this guy, because he had like multiple passports and all these different identities, and before they could even explore the potential of this character, they killed him off. I thought, what the hell is that for? Yeah. Why even do that? And but I've got a lot of examples of that. on Suddenly Susan. I was introduced in the pilot as her fiance, and then I become her ex-fiance. But the guy she ends up getting involved with romantically, played by Judd Nelson, was my brother. You know, and I thought, oh, there's a lot of rich comedic material to mine there. And after like 4 episodes, I was off of Suddenly Susan. I'm like, okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I was doing Prison Break.
Yeah, another good show.
You know, and I was like, I'm thinking this is a really interesting thing because I was Robin Tunney's fiance and that, but she's really in love with the convict guy, and so I thought that's a real interesting kind of predicament to put your leading lady in. Where does she go with her head, you know, the sensible choice, which I was playing, you know, the young doctor and all that kind of thing, or does she go with her heart, you know, the guy that she's really in love with, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, and you know, and I got murdered on that one after 4 episodes. So there's a lot of things like that don't make a lot of sense. And yeah, I think that was something that could have been explored a lot more on Nip Tuck, because it was sort of meant to explain how Dr. McNamara got to be a plastic surgeon in the first place, because his own cosmetic surgery kind of changed the trajectory of his life, you know. And but I'm actually working for those guys again right now. I can't talk too much about it because we're just still filming. But yeah, I worked with Ryan Murphy on that one, and I worked with Tim Minear on Angel, and they're you know they're all involved on the show that I'm working on a guest spot on right now.
Because I remember it's like you weren't portrayed as like a bad dad, like you're playing baseball with your son and you love him, and your wife decides to let him get surgery to get his lip deformity fixed, and you look and you ran out on your family. It was like, okay, where's the next scene?
Apparently it was apparently a conflict that the character I was playing, you know, Dr. McNamara's father. They had only so many resources financially, and he wanted that nest egg that they had to go toward his education, and she wanted it to go toward him getting the surgery, you know. And I felt like, you know, that his education was more important, so that was meant to be the conflict. And I think, you know, back in those days, the fact that she went ahead and did it without his consent or whatever, you know, that sort of, you know, robbed him of sort of wearing the pants in the family, as they used to say. I think that led to a kind of impasse in their relationship, and that's why he left. But yeah, I had gone back to Illinois for 2 years because my ex-wife was very sick at the time, so I moved my whole family back to Illinois so I could have some help from my mother and my sister with just kind of keeping things together, because she was very ill and my son was very little, and I needed to keep working somewhere somehow. Mm-hmm. And so they helped out while I went back to work in Chicago, and that was why I ended up doing Prison Break, because that was filmed there. And when I came back to L.A., the first job back was Nip Tuck.
It was a great show. Like I said, I really liked it. I was just kind of waiting for, why aren't we popping back up to this guy? Why am I not getting more story here? But, you know, I guess that's how it could be. You know.
Yeah. I felt like it was something where there was a whole world that was sort of being introduced that could have been explored more, but I think they just wanted to kind of leave it there to explain why McNamara became a plastic surgeon.
I guess on the bright side, we got your entire story in Return of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah, see, there you go.
I mean, and I have to ask, you know, I know you're working on something now you can't talk about. For all your fans out there, do you have a website? Are you active on social media?
Twitter is the best place to follow me.
And what is your Twitter handle?
It's at Anthony Starke. Starke with an E at the end.
Well, that's really easy.
Yeah, I'm easy to find. Yeah.
And are you on like Instagram or anything like that?
I am not.
And
No,
website.
I don't need to look at other people's selfies. I've got enough pain in my life.
Well,
So
I found you on Twitter, and there you go. And I just followed you. I know you have a Facebook, but that's a personal page. So for people that want to keep up with you, they go onto Twitter at Anthony.
that's the best way. Yeah, because I have a lot of interaction with fans for all the things that we've been talking about, and it's a lot of fun, and we have a lot of jokes back and forth, and I answer questions there and stuff like that. That's the best way for me to interact with people who are interested in the show, the TV shows and movies that I've been a part of.
And I can't thank you enough. I mean, it sincerely is an honor, because that anyone that knows me will vouch that I am a huge fanatic for Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and here you are, the star of it. So this was truly an honor for me.
Well, it was a pleasure for me, and thank you so much for including me in your show.
Well, I want to thank. I hope you can come back on again one day. Maybe we can delve deeper into the past of your cowboy character from 90210 one day.
Yes, I think the world has waited long enough. Let's make it happen.
Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. You have been listening to the Chronicles of Hollywood History. Thank you from Gomez Richmond Productions.